All right, guys, so I hope everybody had a great and restful February break and that you're re energized and ready to get started. We are doing a new unit today. So, we are going to be talking about the Cold War. So, World War II has ended, and everybody just peacefully goes back to living their life in their own countries. No, that's not exactly what happens. What we see now is the United States is going to enter in this long period of the Cold War, which is a time when we are at odds, are against another country, and we, at any moment, it seems like we're on the brink of war, but when it's cold, that means we're actually not fighting. Now, there are going to be some hot pieces of this war because this does last over numerous decades, but right now we're just going to be looking at those early beginnings and how this all started. But first, just a little warm up, a little do now, just a little paragraph here telling me how your break was, and one goal for quarter 3. You'll see this on your handout. One paragraph, how was February break, and then one goal for the rest of quarter 3. All right, so we have some vocabulary words today, and there are 6 on your chart. You will see that on page 2 of your handout. Our words are alliance, lend-lease, capitalism, proletariat, collectivism, and superpowers. Now, superpowers aren't those things that Marvel heroes have. We're talking about superpowers as in world domination of like countries. So your directions here are that you're going to fill out the chart with the definitions that are included throughout the lecture. So the definitions are not here for you just to copy down. You're going to need to go through the slides and find the definitions embedded within the lecture. All right, so the first piece here is we're going to talk about the 2 superpowers that emerged at the end of World War II. Okay, so during World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies, meaning we were on the same side of the war fighting against Germany in Europe. And so they were a part of this alliance. And here you have the definition for alliance, which is a union or association formed for mutual benefit, usually to help each other in a time of war, especially between countries or organizations. Now, after World War II, France, Great Britain, and Germany were economically devastated because that's where the bulk of the fighting had been and were the countries that had been fighting the longest. Now, so at the end, the United States and the Soviet Union, they stand alone as the leading superpowers in the world because of their size, their economic strength, and their military. Now, particularly the United States, because we come out of this as one of the only participants in World War II whose land was not directly affected. Our economy grew tremendously because of this war, and then our land and our people were not in ruins because none of the actual fighting happened on the United States aside from Pearl Harbor. So a superpower is a nation that influences or controls less powerful nations. I keep finding mistakes as I'm talking, so we'll fix those as we go. And so as you're also filling out your vocabulary chart, you have an independent activity chart that's highlighting the differences between the United States and the Soviet Union. Okay, so we're going to look at this in 4 categories: war experience, what they wanted post-war Europe to look like, their governments and economies, and then the rising tensions between the two. Okay, and this is going to lead into the divide between the 2 countries. So you're going to fill out this chart here as well. All of this information is provided in the slides, and you should not have to look anywhere else. So the first, war experiences. So the United States only had about 290,000 soldiers die during World War II. So when you look at casualties, you're going to get a much higher number because casualties count wounded, death, missing in action. But we're just looking at the dead. Our civilian casualties were very limited to just the Pearl Harbor attack because, as we already addressed, there were no actual fighting in the United States. So our cities remained intact and our farms and factories were not destroyed. So we were essentially able to keep living normal lives in the United States while the war was going on. On the other side of things, the Soviet Union suffered enormous civilian casualties of their war. the people in the military. And then they also had about 20 million citizens die. So these were people that had no direct relation to the United States, or not to the United States, to the war. They were not fighting the war. They just happened to live in the Soviet Union where there was fighting happening against the Germans. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. So their country was stripped of their crops, animals, and farmland, and several cities were leveled or bombed to where there were no buildings standing, and a lot of their factories were damaged. Now, the Soviet Union really thought that at the end of the war, the United States was going to provide funding and help them recover. But the United States decided on a get tough policy when it came to the Soviets alone. Now, the United States was helping other countries, but when it came to the Soviets, they decided that they were going to say, they needed to fix this on their own, and they stopped all Lend-Lease shipments. Now, a Lend-Lease is when the United States supplied the United Kingdom, Free France, the Republic of China, and later the Soviet Union and other allied nations with food, oil, and material between 1941 and 1945. Okay, but we stopped those as soon as the war ended and left the Soviet Union to kind of fend for themselves or fix all their mistakes. So again, this is the information that you would use to put in your chart under war experiences. So this is the next part of our chart, post-war Europe. Now, the United States wanted Eastern Europe, so the countries that bordered the Soviet Union, to determine their own government form and decide the type of government they wanted to set up. And Truman and the United States really thought that if they were given the choice, they would pick democracy. On the other side, the Soviet Union wanted all of these Eastern European countries to become communist countries because they wanted a buffer zone of friendly countries to protect them. Thinking back to World War I and World War II, the Soviet Union had been attacked twice by Germany and had suffered great losses in the war, so much so that in World War I they surrendered before the major fighting was even over. So they were doing and making these moves out of security reasons. They claimed Eastern Europe as part of the Soviet sphere of influence. And so from there, even though they told the United States they were going to back out of these Eastern European countries and let them choose their own governments, they never did. And what they did was they created this buffer zone of communist countries, which the United States did not agree with. So this is the material that will go in your post-war Europe section. So here we are moving on to the government and the economy and how these differences are very apparent. We do have the rest of our vocabulary are going to be on these next two slides as well. So in the United States, we have this democratic government and this capitalist economy. And this is where factories, equipment, and production are privately owned. Okay. Businesses decide what they want to produce, and that means consumers or shoppers get to decide what they want to buy based on what is there. Property, factories, and equipment are all privately owned. Okay, so this is the big piece here about capitalism. Businesses are privately owned, farms are privately owned. So you put up the money to start a business, you own that business, you make the larger amount of profit off that business. Now, the Soviet Union, their government style and their economy was based around communism, which regarded the capital system as unjust because it denied the proletarian a fair share of the society's wealth. Now, the proletarian is the working class people, so those people in the factories doing most of the work. The government had complete control of the economy. The state owned businesses, and they decided what goods would be produced. This is also part of the Soviet Union section of the government and the economy. They command or centrally plan the economy. Small farmers join together in collectives. Now, collectivism is an economic system in which the people, often under supervision of the state, the government, jointly own the means of production and distribution. Okay, so instead of owning your own private farm, you would be your farm would be added to groups of other farms and ran by the state as a collective. And then lastly, we have rising tensions between the two. Now, this United States was very outspoken against the Soviet Union, and they wanted their communist power to be contained. And this policy of containment, we're going to learn more about in a couple days, and how this kind of drags us into a couple wars in Asia later on. So they felt that any policy towards the Soviet Union must be that of a long-term, patient, firm, and vigilant plan against containment of Russian expansion. We knew that this was going to be a long-term investment, and we needed to hold firm and be committed to containing any type of Russian or Soviet Union expansion, because if they were allowed to expand, that means they would be expanding and creating communist countries, which we did not want. Now, the Soviet Union, their leader, Joseph Stalin, he openly attacked capitalism. He said that peace was never going to be possible in the world as long as capitalism existed, because you were always going to have people trying to conquer lands for raw materials, and that communism should replace capitalism all over the world. So we have two countries who were formerly allies who are now breaking apart that alliance because they set in very different spectrums politically and economically, and they are very outspoken against each other. Okay, so this is the end of the lecture. So throughout this, you have seen the clear labels to help you fill out your independent activity chart to recognize the differences between the U.S. and the United States. And you've also seen the 6 vocabulary words. I've pointed them out as I've taught, but they're also bolded throughout the slides. So all you need to do is do the do now and fill out your 2 charts based on the information in the lectures. Please let me know if you have any questions.